Hello, welcome back to Jen's Books, and I hope you had a fantastic weekend and enjoyed the sunshine and the storms if you're over in our way. It's been so hot here this weekend. It feels more like being abroad than in the northwest of England, and I'm not complaining, but gosh, it's warm. You can see my glasses are steaming up, even as I'm speaking to you. So this is one of my six from a shelf video. This is where I go and I pick six books that I own or I've read that have one thing in common that I think are good recommendations. So in this video, we're looking at six books that are told from the perspective of unreliable narrators. I love an unreliable narrator. They can be really effective in leading the reader off in misdirections up the garden path and can get you to believe all sorts of things that aren't true. And it usually involves a fantastic sort of twist at somewhere along the line as well. So I've got six books ranging back from 1984 all the way up to a much more recent book, only a few years old, that I think you might enjoy, and I hope there's something here that inspires you to go out and read one of the books. If you have read these books before, it would be great to know what your thoughts were, whether you enjoyed them. And as I say, it's okay if we disagree as well. That's absolutely fine. The first book I wanted to talk about is a bit of a deep dive. It's going back to 1984, and it's The WASP Factory by Iain Banks. And I don't think I know anybody who didn't read this in the 90s. When I was studying, it seemed to be a real a favourite book even for people who didn't really read a lot. The WASP Factory, you can see this is a chunky edition with 3 books. It's actually quite a slim book, so don't be put off by this particular edition. But I don't think there's many people who didn't read this book. So we're told the story from the point of view of the protagonist, Frank. Frank's a 16-year-old boy who lives on an island with his father, Angus. They live somewhere in the Scottish Highlands, but it's never actually sort of disclosed where it is. He also has a brother called Eric, who's in a mental institution on the mainland. So he is quite a complicated character. Frank, it's clear that Angus cares for him, he feeds him, looks after him, but there's a sort of a distance there between the two of them. And if anybody comes to the island, Frank has to introduce himself as Angus's nephew, not his son, which is sort of a bit strange. And he's kind of left to his own devices an awful lot. And also Angus has this locked room. It's a bit Bluebeard that Frank's not allowed to go into, but there is a reveal later on in the book with that. But Frank is very troubled himself. He experiments by killing small animals in what he calls the WASP Factory, and he progresses on this. You may know, often the psychology of a killer is they start by killing animals and then they work their way up to killing people. And I don't think it's too much of a spoiler alert to say that things continue to progress in this book in that sort of an angle. But there's loads of twists and turns here. It's quite dark, quite grim. So it might not be for all readers, but if you've read Iain Banks before and you like his work, it's definitely one to read. And if you've not read Iain Banks before but think you might like his work, it's probably one to start with. It's certainly one, as I say, that so many people say, oh, it's one of my favourite books, one of my favourite books. And because it's told through that first person point of view, we do feel very close to Frank, and we sort of, there's a level of trust and a level of sympathy for him. But it's really interesting to see how Iain Banks plays with the reader's emotions in that particular book. But there's a lot of family trauma here. If you're not sure whether it's going to be suitable, it's worth looking at sort of online to sort of see the sorts of issues that it deals with. But it's certainly one that sticks in my memory even after all the years since I read it. The next one is by one of my favourite authors who I'll have mentioned before, and it's Sarah Waters' The Little Stranger. And this is a bit of a gothic novel, although I don't think it's gothic. It's not like amped up gothic, it's sort of a bit more subtle, but it has a lot of those tropes that you'd expect from a gothic novel. It centres around an 18th century house called the Hundreds and a family that lives there. Caroline Ayres, who is an unmarried heiress, her mother and her brother Roderick. It takes place just after the Second World War, and Roderick is recovering both mentally and physically from what he experienced in in the war and all those horrors. So again, it's told in the first person point of view, but through a doctor called Dr. Faraday. Dr. Faraday summoned to treat a maid that works in the house who thinks that they've seen something supernatural. So we've got these supernatural elements. It's sort of ambiguous as to whether or not it is supernatural or whether it's something else. And the reason that Dr. Faraday is an unreliable narrator is he kind of has his own objectives that come through. It's a lot of showing over telling here, you reading between the lines to see what his true intentions are, and there's a kind of friendship, kind of love affair relationship with the heiress Caroline, but everything's going well until Caroline's dog attacks a visiting child, and then things just sort of start to deteriorate. The house is already deteriorating. They don't have the money to look after it. They don't have the financial wherewithal to sort of keep the house going, but in his back of his mind, Dr. Faraday used to play at the house when he was a child. I think his mother worked at the house, and he's always had this connection with the building and sort of a want to own this particular building. And so we're never entirely sure how reliable he is and how trustworthy he is, because of these sort of underlying tensions that go through. But with Sarah Waters that her writing is going to be immersive. It's going to draw you in. She's going to really capture the time period, and the setting is always incredibly vivid, and it's no different here. So we have the sort of gothic sense of, is there something going on in the house? There was another daughter who died in the house, and there's a sense of whether or not the memory of the death of this girl or the girl herself is haunting the family in this beautiful but decrepit country pile. So it's a really, really good book to read. If you've not read Sarah Waters before, you might want to start with Fingersmith or something like that. I think Fingersmith is just such a rip-roaring ride of twists and turns, and also Tipping the Velvet is fabulous as well. But The Little Stranger is really worth reading. Well, everything Sarah Waters has written, I think, is worth reading, but that unreliable narrator is a really interesting one, as someone who's sort of observing the family but not necessarily in a reliable way. So that's the next one. The next book is one that's been turned into a film. You're probably familiar with Room by Emma Donoghue. She's a fantastic writer. I've read quite a lot of her books, and they kind of, some I love, some not so much, but when she gets it right, she really, really gets it right. And Room is a book that I read a couple of years ago and I could not put down. It was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize in 2010, and that was the year that it was published as well. So what makes the narrator unreliable here? Well, the story is told from the perspective of a 5-year-old child called Jack, who lives in a room, hence the name of the title, with his mother. And it's all he's ever known. He was born in this room. His whole world is this room. So every single minute detail of it holds importance and value to him. We find out by reading between the lines that his mother has been held captive for 7 years by a character who's only known as Old Nick in the book. And we see everything through his point of view. It's quite funny and it's warm, but it's also shocking and horrific. And in the book, his mother plans and plots a way for them to escape. And it's not much of a spoiler. I think that they do manage to escape. But what's interesting is Jack's experiences of the world outside for the first time, almost like an alien. He's seen things on TV, but he's no experience of the world outside this room. So I found this incredibly inventive, and it completely drew me in. I was nervous because I think writing from the point of view of a child is incredibly challenging. Trying to remember what it's like keeping it plausible, and maintaining that through the length of a novel, I think is no mean feat. So again, some quite horrific stuff in here, but also some really splendid writing, and one of Emma Donoghue's finest, I think. It's about resilience, it's about love in the face of horror, it's about what makes a family, and it's definitely, if you've not read it and you know, you feel that you're happy to read it, definitely worth reading for this unreliable narrator who only sees things through his own unique point of view. So we're seeing glimpses of the world, and we're reading between the lines to put two and two together as to what is happening. The next book I wanted to mention is one that I really loved, and a lot of these are debuts actually, which really shocked me. Well, certainly the next couple of books are debuts. This is Elizabeth is Missing by Emma Healey, and this was published in 2014. This is just a beautiful book. It's heartbreaking but warm, and yeah, it's just a fantastic book. Basically, the narrator is Maud. Maud is in her late 80s and she is living with dementia. She's cared for by her daughter Helen and a caregiver called Carla, and they come in and check in on her. And she believes her best friend Elizabeth is missing. But the difficulty is her memory is so patchy, and she wakes up and she's forgotten things and she's having to repeat things, that trying to pull together the mystery is incredibly difficult for her. And she has little scraps of paper in her pockets where she writes down clues. So she's kind of like a detective trying to work out what's happened to her friend. But in the mix of this as well, because of her condition, she's going back and forth in time, and she's thinking about her sister who disappeared back in the 40s. Her sister was called Suki, and by solving one mystery, she sort of starts delving into the other. So it's quite heartbreaking, particularly the ending, but it's also really warm. It's about those relationships between the women, and you know, the past coming in through to the present, and these mysteries intertwining. It's unreliable for obvious reasons. Her memory is not great. It's about identity. It's about memory loss. It's about loss of identity, and it's about aging. But it's done in a very sympathetic and engaging way. I just think this is a beautiful piece of writing, and a character study really. So definitely one that I would recommend and really enjoyed. The next one is one that I really love, and it's been a bit divisive. It's been read by an awful lot of people. It's another debut novel but really took off, and it's Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. If you have tried to read this before and gave up partway through, or you haven't read it before, what I would say is the character of Eleanor is immediately sort of quite bristling and quite unlikable, but there are reasons for it. Keep with it. It's a really beautiful book, really worth keeping with. Basically, Eleanor Oliphant, she has again sort of a family trauma in the background. She's a 29-year-old woman. Again, it's the first person point of view, so we're seeing everything through her eyes and through her point of view. She is very socially awkward. She doesn't make friends. She doesn't link in with people. She works in a graphic design company in a job which she kind of fell into many years before. It was published in 2017 as well, I should say that, and it I think it won the Costa Prize that year as well. So it's a book about isolation and loneliness. She drinks 2 bottles of vodka every weekend just to get through the weekend so she can get back to work. So there's that sort of theme as well about alcoholism. And in the book, Eleanor becomes sort of a delusional relationship with this singer that she falls in love with, and thinks that he has reciprocating feelings. And as we go through, we find, you know, that perhaps that's not the case. And she makes friends with a character called Raymond, who is really lovely. And it's all about friendship. It's all about putting out feelers. As I say, she's unreliable because, again, she sees the world in a really unique and narrow viewed kind of a way, so you're reading between the lines. She has no family. She speaks to her mother once a week on the phone, but apart from that, she's just an incredibly lonely character with a very traumatic and difficult past. But again, it is warm. Once I got through the first bit and got over the fact that there was this character that I wasn't so keen on, and realised that there was reasons behind that, I really love this book. I couldn't put it down, and I read it incredibly quickly. It's warm. There's a real gut punch of emotion in there as well. But yeah, I really enjoyed this, and as I say, she's quite a troublesome and difficult narrator to get to grips with to begin with. It's not accessible. It's incredibly accessible. The prose is really well written. It all, you know, it's not difficult to follow or get into. It's literally that the character is immediately not the most likable, but if you persevere with it, it's an absolute gem. It's a really beautiful book. So that's Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman, and again another debut. No right to be so good with their first novels. The final book I wanted to talk about I read on Kindle, so I will insert a picture here for you, and it's a bit of a different sort of a read. It's a thriller. It was published in 2018 and it's called The Woman in the Window by AJ Finn. And this is slightly different in a way because she's an potentially unreliable witness as well as an unreliable narrator. Her name's Anna Fox. She is a former child psychologist. She has agoraphobia due to PTSD from a very awful car accident that she had. She's recently separated from her husband Ed, who has custody of their daughter as well. So she talks to Ed regularly on the phone, but otherwise, again, very lonely, very reclusive life. She spends her time playing online chess, talking to other recluses, and spying on her neighbours. And the only contact really she has is with her physio and her shrink, and you know, these weekly phone calls with her ex-husband. So she's very lonely, very cut off. So a new family move in close by called the Russells, and she becomes quite friendly with the Jane, who is the mother. There's Jane, there's Ethan, who's a sort of a troubled teenage character, and then there's Alistair, who she feels is quite controlling and is not not a nice man. And then one night Anna's looking out of a window spying on her neighbours, and she sees Jane being stabbed to death. So the first thing she does is she calls the police and explains what's happened. But when they go to look into it, they find that there is a woman who looks completely different to the woman she knew as Jane, who says, no, everything's fine, I'm Jane. Everything's fine. She's clearly delusional. And so there's this question about whether Anna is seeing the truth, seeing what actually happened, or whether it's delusion or what's going on. And with the book we find out more and more about Anna as we go on, as well as this central mystery, the central thriller as to what's happened to the neighbours, and is she in any risk herself, you know, in the situation that she's in. So really good page turner, really enjoyed it. So just a slightly different kind of feel to some of the other books that I've mentioned today. It's a good thriller. Some of the other books are sort of more literary, or well, Room is probably a bit of a horror, and the Wasp Factory also is quite uncomfortable reading. But what these books all have in common is that they are character driven, and they have these fantastically engaging first person narrators, but not necessarily to be completely trusted. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I might do another one with unreliable narrators, because when I started thinking about it, there are so many great books with unreliable narrators. So I just pulled out 6 for this video, so I can certainly do another one on that. But it'd be great to know your thoughts, and I hope you have a fantastic week, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks. Bye.